Last year, the world connected around 239 gigawatt of new solar capacity to the grid. That marked another all-time record and was an impressive 45% annual growth rate.
2022 is the year that unleashed the global solar potential in a new way. The global solar market grew 45% alone in that year, with 239 gigawatts worldwide. Solar PV expanded its position as leading renewable energy source with 2/3 of total installations. Those are some of the numbers published in the Global Market Outlook for Solar Power 2023 to 2027. Published by the European Solar Association, SolarPower Europe. It's an annual report, and in this episode, we'll dive really into depth with some of the study's outcome. So prepare for some relevant updates and insights. Welcome to the Smartery podcast, a podcast for and with the creators of the new energy world. A world in which energy will be renewable, decentralized and digital, bringing together electricity, heat and mobility. Let us show you how we will get there and who will get us there. As my guest for this episode, I have none other than Michael Schmela, the director of SolarPower Europe's award-winning market intelligence team, which is not only regularly publishing solar market reports, but specifically the Global Market Outlook for Solar Power, which was launched during the Smartery in Munich. Apart from that, Michael is also executive advisor and a member of the leadership team at SolarPower Europe, the association of the European solar sector. Having said that, let's jump right into the episode. It's great to have you on board, Michael. Welcome.
Wonderful to be here, Tsakis. Thanks for inviting me.
Well, I must say it's always a great position to be in, to be the bearer of good news. And I think good news you have certainly plenty of. So let's dive right in. Can you maybe shortly tell us about the most groundbreaking news or developments highlighted in the new Global Market Outlook edition?
Sure, happy to. Well, first, solar is on the fast track. I think that's the key message. 2022 will likely be remembered as the year when solar deployment entered a new growth dimension. So that was driven by soaring energy prices, supply chain stabilization, and post-pandemic recovery programs. Last year, the world connected around 239 gigawatt of new solar capacity to the grid. That marked another all-time record and was an impressive 45% annual growth rate, actually the highest since 2016. And as a consequence, total global solar capacity crossed the magic Terawatt threshold in early 2022. And at the end of that year, we had around 1.2 terawatt installed. And it looks like that the positive market developments in the first months of 2023 promise another solar boom year. We expect around 341 gigawatt additions this year. That would be another 43% growth. And in our high scenario, that's a 5-year market outlook, we believe that the annual market could grow to nearly 800 gigawatt in a high scenario. We're talking about 1 year, and around 600 gigawatt in our medium scenario in 2027.
Well, that are some really impressive numbers already. And this episode is really going to be number heavy because we'll dive into more and more details here. So those are the big headlines. What else was groundbreaking or what else was different? Because I think this year will be remembered as the new record year, as something that we sort of come back to every once in a while, every 2 years or something. So are there any significant differences apart from the staggering growth?
Yes, I think what changed for solar in 2022 is that's why we consider the year as an inflection point, is the technology's newly discovered image by a growing number of policymakers. We feel that solar power now enjoys much wider spread acceptance as a key tool to achieve local energy security in the midterm. So to give you an example, during the recent fossil fuel-sparked energy crisis, the International Energy Agency used actually 2 reports to highlight solar's critical role to reduce European Union's dependence on Russian gas. So in the EU solar strategy that was launched in May 2022, they even called solar the kingpin of the continent's effort to get off Russian gas. And such geostrategic considerations are applicable for other energy importing countries as well. But in other words, solar has now, and I think this is really important, untangled what was previously considered a sort of Gordian knot, the so-called energy trilemma of sustainability, affordability, and security of supply. And that's a true USP.
So that's really good news. That means there is by now a much larger buy-in into the technology itself and not so much debating anymore. I guess that will also set the ground for even bigger developments. Before we dive into even more exciting developments in the global PV market, a quick shout out to our partner for this episode. Today's episode is presented by Siemens Smart Infrastructure. Siemens is shaping the market for intelligent, adaptive infrastructure for today and the future. The company provides customers with a comprehensive end-to-end portfolio from a single source, with products, systems, solutions, and services from the point of power generation all the way to consumption. Siemens Smart Infrastructure is your partner for safe and reliable solar energy integration. I think your solar growth forecast points out that installed capacity is expected to double almost every 3 years. Is that one of the big main drivers behind that, or what other main conditions will enable that growth?
Well, it's actually very simple. It's the so-called 3 Ps: policy, policy, and policy. These are simply the key for rapid expansion of solar. The technology itself is ready for much faster growth. So solar featured an unmatched versatility, powering individual energy self-sufficiency, and it's also comparatively quick to deploy utility scale projects at competitive low cost in comparison to other technologies. And despite solar's levelized cost of electricity, which is a key metric, so-called LCOE, sliding somewhat upwards last year, actually for the first time due to supply chain issues and inflation, solar remains profoundly cheaper to produce electricity than taking it from new fossil fuels or nuclear power sources. Obviously, there are many obstacles in the way to fully tap solar's potential, which are somewhat different around the world. And in Europe, for example, we suffered a lot from the lack of labor. So it's all about skills. So if we had more installers last year, we would have installed much more than 40 gigawatts in 2022. Demand was so much higher for solar during the energy crisis. So what we need is really many, many more installers to get the systems on the roofs, on the ground. And this means significant efforts is needed at the national, at the regional, at the local level, so that governments are working through curricula and with education authorities to match simply the skill needs with training on offer. That's a little bit a European problem. You have other problems in other countries. Another one is obviously grid capacities. That's both on the distribution and transmission levels. The urgency differs depending on size and maturity of the market, but generally this needs to be fixed ASAP. And I think a third one, which is also important, is market design. The sector simply needs stable boundary conditions to invest. Retroactive cuts are a no-go.
So those are 3 bottlenecks: the shortage of skilled labor, specifically in Europe. We have grid bottlenecks and the market design. Let's zero in on the grid bottlenecks here for a moment, because I think in the report you really stressed that factor also quite a lot. So what measures do you think could or should and must be taken immediately to really fix this in medium terms?
Okay, there are a couple of things that need to be done. So I think one is for sure preparedness. So grid system operators should be planning and anticipating the needs of renewable majority grid. This would help line up the investment needed in infrastructure. It's permitting. That's an issue across the board and around the globe. So national governments simply must streamline and accelerate the permitting of national and cross-border grid infrastructure. Right now, permitting large grid infrastructure can take up to 7 years in Europe. And if it's cross-border projects, sometimes even 10 years. That's simply not acceptable. Then you have, I just give you some keywords, digitalization. So politicians should simply send strong signal to grid operators on the need to embrace digitalization. Then it's about flexibility. So we need to massively promote flexible resources on the demand side and the generation side. It's about really mapping the flexibility needs and develop also price signal frameworks to use to really tap the flexibility potential. And yeah, it's also about hybridization. So we have to promote hybrid solar projects, coupling solar with energy storage or another complementary renewable energy source, such as wind.
Now, you mentioned that just previously some specifically European bottlenecks. If we switch from bottlenecks to drivers or leverages. I know that at the Smart Europe in Munich back in June, I had the pleasure to be talking to some experts from Africa, some from South America. And the global market outlook specifically also zeroes in on corporate PPAs in development countries as a really ideal leverage. So we see a lot of movement in the PPA sector, not only in development countries, of course, also in Europe, in regards to recent legislative proposals to set up a PPA marketplace. What's your take on the global development in regards to PPAs and the shifting of business models?
Okay, let me just briefly take it first for developing countries, because we had indeed for the first time a feature in the global market outlook on that topics. There are a few promising initiatives for corporate solar PPAs, but and that's almost everywhere the case where we looked at in the developing countries, that most countries simply lack policy frameworks to tap the gigantic potential of bilateral solar PPAs. That's different in the developed world, but even in Europe, for example, due to regulatory uncertainty last year around this market revenue cap, which was initiated by a couple of governments to basically take away some windfall profits, we saw the PPA market contract by a considerable amount. So this undermines simply the business case out of the blue. On the other hand, with decreasing cost, and that's happening now again after the supply chain issues are solved, we see a big interest in PPA contracts on the corporate side. So we are hoping also that the EU electricity market design revision, likely finalized by end of year, will support the confidence of the market in long-term energy contracts. So all in all, there is a lot of interest, but the key again is, as I already said in the beginning when I mentioned the 3 Ps, it's all about policy. So we need simply stable framework conditions.
Now, switching from policy to markets, the global market outlook also points out there are more and more countries as gigawatt scale markets emerging, and there is an expansion of developed solar markets in general. Are there any trends we can observe in that regard connected to the emergence of gigawatt markets?
Well, in the end, it's about competitive cost and also trust in a new technology that has to be established over time. But that's happening. So we have this in the global market outlook, this gigawatt chapter, and we've seen actually a considerable growth in the number of gigawatt scale solar markets. So I think 2021 we had 17, that grew to 26 in 2022. And we forecast over 30 gigawatt scale markets in 2023. And for 2025, it will be 50. Okay, that's a lot of numbers, but you see there's quite some growth that And that's great news, as it simply means that many countries are understanding the attractiveness of solar power and are really embracing it more and more.
Wow. So, like I say, there is good news and good news and good news in this episode. And of course, some of one or the other roadblock to overcome. And maybe let's have a look into that. Despite 2022 being a record year, as you said, and one that will be remembered in regards to solar growth and brilliant market perspectives, it's still the case that solar only makes out 4.5% of the global electricity use, which is almost nothing if you compare it. So more than 90% still comes from other sources. So is the prospected solar growth enough to achieve global decarbonization through renewable energies, or has it to be even much faster than it already is if we effectively want to meet climate targets?
Well, watching the news, and if you look at all these extreme weather around the world, we should indeed be going much faster. We've been first talking about climate change, then the term climate crisis was introduced by some foresighted global citizens, and I think it was recently the UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres announced we've been going beyond global warming and we are into global boiling. July is likely going to be the hottest month on record ever. And so, yes, we should be going much faster. However, one has to take the rather small power generation share, solar power generation share, into perspective. 4.5% is still a relative number, but we do observe clear growth acceleration. Solar's share increased, and this is a little bit number crunching, by 0.8 percentage points or 22% in 2022 compared to 0.5 percentage points or 16% in 2021. So things are happening. They have to grow faster, but what we still have to take into consideration is we're still pretty much on the rather flat part of an exponential curve. As we've seen in the past, solar installations have been actually growing so much faster than anyone anticipates. Basically all, and this it includes us as well, all energy analysts have dramatically underestimated the growth of solar and are constantly upgrading their forecasts. So just to give you an example about us, we're solar lobbyists, optimistic on the solar optimistic side by nature. In terms of capacity for 2023, this global market outlook's medium scenario forecast surpasses the previous year's projection by 85 gigawatt. So we're now expecting a market of 340 gigawatts this year. That's quite a bit. And if you look at last year's edition, this level was only expected for 2026. So things are moving quickly, much quicker than everyone anticipates. Or in other words, the solar industry has really prepared itself and is able to grow now much faster if we have the right policy frameworks. That's key.
All right, we only have 4.5% currently, but that's just the beginning. We're looking at a much steeper growth soon because we're entering the hockey stick phase. So that's really good news. One of the key takeaways for me already has been that it's about policy making. And if I may add, the fourth P to that triple P is permitting. As we earlier heard, one of the biggest roadblocks there is permitting in regards to grid installations. So we really need to crack that. 7 to 10 years is such a long time, specifically if you put it into relation to climate targets in 2030, that is exactly in 7 years. So we really need to have to speed up that process. But we are on a good track. So to come to the end here, as a conclusion and as a fun question, let's imagine indeed you're back in 1 or 2 years as a guest on the Smart EE podcast. Most likely you will have amazing numbers with you again in 1 or 2 years. But apart from that, do you already see anything happening in the market that might be really also be a significant difference in 1 or 2 years? A development, something in the pipeline that is noteworthy?
Generally, solar surprises us positively. But when seeing how fast solar is moving, the outcome of the recent G20 energy transition ministers meeting in Goa was actually very disappointing. So they just acknowledged the transformative potential of renewable energy, but that's simply not enough. We need a global renewables target. And that was something that was not agreed on. We all know that solar and other renewables will be the key tools to reduce carbon reductions needed to stay on a 1.5 degrees pathway. But what we really need now is commitments from global governments to remove the barriers and really unleash this potential. So there should be now a target of deploying at least 1.5 terawatt in 2030, with solar contributing the major part, over 1 terawatt. And the newly founded Global Renewables Alliance is actually asking for such a global target of tripling total renewable energy capacity to at least 11 terawatt by 2030. And this is what COP28 later this year must be aiming for. So I hope that when we meet again in 1 or 2 years, that this is something that could be agreed on to really bring solar, support solar on its, and the other renewables as well, because we need the whole concert to simply push them on their growth path.
And so that really is up to another podcast guest of ours, Bruce Douglas, who was part of the Smarter E mini-series we did and we're still running. So maybe in a year we can actually invite both of you back together. Bruce Douglas as the CEO of the Global Renewable Alliance, and you with yet another exciting numbers. Let's hope both of you do a great job, and there's plenty more of good news to be talking about in 1 year or 2 years, if I get the pleasure to be inviting you back. Thanks a lot, Michael.
Thanks, Sakis. It was a pleasure.
The global market outlook for solar power is available for free download on our website. This year's report zooms in on the role of solar in Southeast Asia, a region with a total solar capacity of 32 gigawatt. 3.4 gigawatt was installed just last year, which is a slight downward curve from the 4.2 gigawatt installed previously in 2021. So if you want to dive more into the details, download the report on intersolar.de/publications.